Good afternoon and welcome to the debut spotlight. My name is Ellen Comisar, and today I am delighted to welcome Morgan Talty, whose newest book, Fire Exit, came out this spring, and we are featuring it today for Native American Heritage Month, and we'll talk a little bit about Native American literature and where it fits and why it's sometimes separated from the standard American literature, which we have issues with. So let me just give you a little bit of introduction information, both about A Mighty Blaze and Morgan, and then we'll dive into the discussion. A Mighty Blaze was founded in the age of COVID. We are now 4+ years strong, and we are not stopping anytime soon. We were formed to bring books to readers and authors to readers and vice versa when all the book tours canceled, and we plan to continue going forward indefinitely. Our interviews, as you know, air live on Facebook and YouTube and live forevermore on YouTube. So if you don't catch them now, go find what we've done in the past and you will be delighted. You can find more information about us at amightyblaze.com and sign up for our newsletter, which will give you all the information about our great programs, our podcast, and various events that we may be sponsoring. We are a group of 30 creative professionals who volunteer our time, and it's one of the favorite things I do. So welcome. And before we get started, please, if you are watching and have questions for Morgan, we are going to take them later in the show. So Fire Exit, which is Morgan's debut novel, follows on the very successful Night of the Living Res. And this book has gotten fabulous reviews across the board. Time magazine said it was spellbinding, a compassionate portrait of a man who is desperate to understand who he is and where he came from. AP says it's a thoughtful, heartfelt exploration of what it means to be part of a family and community. It is both tender and heartbreaking, sweetened with touches of humor, and it raises important questions about human connection and belonging, says the American Library Association. The reviews go on and on. Morgan does not shy away from blistering questions of belonging and identity, but rather leans into them in taut and often precise prose, says the New York Times. This book is garnering lots of attention and is listed on many, many lists of the best books. It is on the long list for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, which is a joint initiative of the Carnegie Corporation and the American Library Association. It is the first book listed on People Magazine's list of the best books for Native American Heritage Month. Elle Magazine called it one of the best new books to read this summer. It came out in June, and also included it on its list of best literary novels of the year. The Center for Fiction has shortlisted it for its 2024 First Novel Prize. It is a finalist for the Maya Angelou Book Award, and in June, Amazon put it on its list of best books of 2024 so far, as did Harper's Bazaar. So congratulations, Morgan.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've done it again.
Thank you for not listing even more of them.
I had to cut it off at some point.
You did, yeah.
All right. So for those who don't know, Morgan is a citizen of the Penobscot Indian Nation and is the author of Night of the Living Res, which was a best-selling and critically acclaimed story collection from Tin House Books. It, too, was award-winning in many ways. I'm not going to list all those, but Morgan's writing has appeared in Granta, the Georgia Review, Shenandoah, the Tri-Quarterly, Narrative Magazine, Lit Hub, and other places. He is a winner of the 2021 Narrative Prize, and he has been supported by the Elizabeth George Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. Morgan is an assistant professor of English and creative writing and Native American and contemporary literature at the University of Maine, Orono, and he's on the faculty at Stone Coast MFA in creative writing and the Institute of American Indian Arts. He is also the prose editor of the Massachusetts Review, and he lives in Maine. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We are delighted. So Fire Exit is, as they say, a taut book, a tight story, Can you just give our readers who may not have yet seen it or heard about it, just a brief synopsis of what this book is about?
I can try. My editor had to write the jacket copy because I just could not figure out how to say it. But the premise of the book, or really the thing that gets the whole story going, and this isn't necessarily the story, but it's the inciting incident. So the inciting incident really is, we have this man, Charles, who's non-native, but was very young, 2 years old, when his mother, who's also non-native, had married a native man and moved on to the Penobscot reservation in, I want to say, in the 60s, like 1961 or 2 or something like that. And he moved over there, and as time passes, you get some back and forth, in his youth, but mostly it's him in his later, he's in his 60s, I believe. And
It's been a while.
yeah, it's been a while. And what happens is, he ultimately has to leave the reservation because he's non-native when he becomes 18. And
by tribal rule.
Yeah, by tribal law. The Settlement Act, the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act, had passed by 1980, and so he stayed one extra year, fibbing his age, and then he moved to a plot of land his stepfather, who he considered his father, really had built, found like a place to live, and he ends up dating a woman he'd grown up with, a girl, all the way same age, and they have a child. And the child's she's only a quarter blood. She only has 25% native blood in her. And so in order for her to have a native child that's technically able to be on tribal census, they'd have to be a 25% or above. So she'd have to marry and have a baby with, or she wouldn't have to marry, but she'd have to have a child with somebody who's an enrolled member. But she has a child with Charles, and the Charles is not technically, under that regulation, the child would not be considered Penobscot and put on the census, and not afforded the full rights that a Penobscot person would have. So that happens, and she decides to lie and say the child belongs to another man because she wants her daughter to grow up on the census being native, right?
And be able to stay.
Yeah, being able to say, oh yeah, I am native. And they're like, well, can you prove it? And have that provability, like being able to prove that you're native, which is a strange thing. And it really is. Like natives ask natives at weird times. But Charles, having understood, this tension, right? Says, okay, kind of, he kind of goes along with it, and he spends his life watching her grow up across the river. And it's about,
he can literally see the house she grows up in,
yeah,
with the mother and the man who the mother marries.
Yeah.
So he can observe them from his front yard.
Yeah. And he's just watched her his whole life, really. I mean, ever since she was born. And he's had enough, he's reached this point. He's reconnected with his mother, his estranged mother. They have a very fraught relationship because she blames him for a death, Frederick, his stepfather's death. And so he's caring for this person who's slipping away from dementia while trying to reconcile it. And at the same time, he's trying to, as the opening line reads, I wanted the girl to know the truth. His daughter, trying to tell his daughter, or try to find the means to tell his daughter that he's her father, right? In some suggestive way. So he's torn between these two things, right? And
a lot of the book seems to be about the stories how we define ourselves, which stories we have for ourselves, and the stories that we're able to tell others, and the stories we can't tell others. And he's really struggling with all that.
Yeah, he brings to, the table, I think, these questions about, and he's very contradictory in a lot of the things he says, because I think for me that was a deliberate thing, is like, I'm not going to commit to saying this because I don't really know, because it varies person by person. There's like
Mm-hmm.
the line that's like, if you don't know all the stories that belong to you, how can you really be a fully realized person? And it's like,
Right.
I actually don't really agree with him, like, in that regard. I think there's a better way of saying it that encompasses what he is trying to articulate.
Mm-hmm.
But he gives to readers, I think, these moments to think about the stories we know, we don't know, right? And we might want to go hunting for. It also teaches us, I think, a little bit, or shows us what happens when we do find out the story. Like, what do we do? Because there has to be a decision made, right? Like, do we choose? I have an example in my mind. I know somebody who was adopted, and they they're older now. I mean, this is my mother-in-law. She won't even care. She won't see this, but she was adopted, and it was like a couple of years ago, 6, 7 years ago, she found her sisters on Facebook, like her real biological sisters. She made the choice to not contact them. You know
Interesting.
what I mean? So it's like, Charles would have been like, I don't know what Charles would have said, but like, she chose to exclude that narrative from her life, even though it's belonged to her, right? Even though those sisters biologically were part of her. Um,
And that choice of what stories you choose to tell obviously has then ramifications, as it does for Charles. How does that affect his relationship with his mother? How does it affect? He continues to have some sort of interaction relationship with the mother of his daughter over the years. She
yeah,
comes across the river to see him, or sometimes he goes onto the reservation to try to take care of some logistics. Um, so the impact of the stories we tell or don't tell really shape these relationships.
yeah, it's all really about like what we say, right? And what we choose not to say, and how what we not to say, how we if we don't say something, that's still saying something. If we say something, that's also in a way sometimes not saying anything at all, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the book, this it's funny, is like people kind of wonder like, well, what's happening in this book? And it's like there's so much happening, but just in a different way. It's like there's so much action, but the emphasis of the action is not in a typical not typical, it's quieter, but it's loud if
Yes.
you listen to it, in my
Oh,
mind.
these characters are very memorable, but it is a quiet book. There's a lot of what is Charles thinking? How are his relationships developing, evolving? How is he struggling with those evolutions? I mean, it's a very real person with sort of this quiet, burning desire to tell his daughter, hey, I'm your dad, and this is who I am, and this is what we lost, in a sense.
Yeah, I think it's a confusing book for me. It's like it just is, because it's like it's so I feel like you can talk about it in so many ways, and,
Yes.
you know, for people who praise the book, and like how we're talking about it right now, there's as much to be said about it in a good way as there are, for people who are like, well, I disagree with like what Charles, like the ideas or things, or like um the antithesis to whatever Charles is trying to say, which again comes back to me trying to keep this balance of like, at times he's like, oh, I don't want her to know, and then he's like, oh, I do want her to know, so keeping him accountable a little bit. But the book, I'm interested to see in the next 10 years what type of indigenous literature comes out, because I'm just a firm believer in that, it's not one book, but a collection of all of our narratives put together, that we're able to find answers to questions that we've been asking to try to get out of the mess of colonialism, and not just indigenous people. I'm talking everybody, So I hope somebody writes a better book than I did on identity in the indigenous community. I mean,
I
I
find
really
that
do.
hard to believe that anyone will do it in the near term. We're talking with Morgan Talty about his beautiful book, Fire Exit, which came out in June. And we are celebrating Native American Heritage Month here at the Blaze. Can you talk? I know I've read a number of interviews with you about that you've done and Q&As where you've talked about the sense of Native American literature versus American literature, and how colleges will do a survey course on Native American literature, but then feel a need to sort of carve out, this distinction and make it distinct as opposed to part of the full American narrative. Which, can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that? And
Yeah, I found it funny. It was never an intentional thing. I just realized I kind of like recognized the funkiness of this book, like that a Native person wrote a book told from the point of view of a white guy who's like looking at Native people and not necessarily speaking for, speaking for them in some instances, but we don't get any really real indigenous like perspectives. But then again, do we? Like the question of, he grew up on the reservation. Does he come biologically from the tribe? It's never said that he doesn't. I kind of wonder at times about his dad. Like, who was his father? I know I'm getting sidetracked, but I'm going to come back to that
that's
point.
fine.
There was no mention really of his biological father. His biological father could have very well been indigenous. I have family members who are indigenous and can be enrolled, but they choose not to be. Like, you can make that choice. And that's affected people in my family who cannot be on the census because their parent has chosen not to, be on it. And it blows my mind. But so who knows? He could be related to a Cherokee princess. I had to make that joke. I'm sorry. But
well, I think you learn about the Native American culture and the life on the reservation sort of as the obverse of Charles's story.
Yeah.
You learn about it from what he's not and what he tells us about what he's not, or what he lost in leaving the reservation and not being able to be the father to his daughter, and how that separated him. So there's a whole discussion here about belonging and what belonging means. And it's not just a Native thing. I mean, we all have groups and identities of who do we belong to, what groups do we belong to, what families do we belong to. But it's also about sort of the grief and loneliness that comes from belonging or then unbelonging. And I think that's one of the things Charles struggles with, but as do many of the other characters. I think, the mother of his child struggles. Do you think that plays into sort of this American literature versus Native American literature?
Yeah. I mean, there were a few things you said that really kind of connect well to that. Compartmentalizing, identity on a shelf, right? One is like, the culture of like the Penobscot culture in this is never like, that's not the foundation of the narrative, right? Like the foundation of the narrative is the emotion and the character themselves first before we add anything in there, right? And my approach, like, I feel like the best literature, and this is a thing that I think a lot of people need to. Alexa, don't interrupt me. Alexa, shh. Sorry about that.
Okay.
No problem.
I think there's a large conversation that needs to happen in Indigenous literature studies, kind of. But that's problematic in and of itself too, which I can get into. But even just thinking about that, like the best literature I read is not performative. Like it's not selling, you know, the dancing, like the fancy dancer native, right? It's not selling, you know, it's not subscribing to what the dominant pop culture sees, right? Has seen and keeps seeing through media, right? Like, oh, this is what, like if you go to Google Images and type in Native American, all of them except for like maybe one or two of like Deb Holland and like somebody else, I don't know, it's like Western Plains natives and headdresses. There's no real contemporary pictures of Indigenous people. Like that's how like a lot of people view us, and it's getting better and it's obviously changed. But at the university level, it's like you go and it's like you have there's like Native American literature classes, there's Asian American literature classes, there's African American literature classes, I mean, you keep going, you know, like all the way through it. But there's no class called just like white people literature. You know what I mean? Like they label it and then it doesn't exist. They have, you know, 20th or 21st century literature.
Right.
That's like an amalgamation of, you know, minorities and BIPOC writers alongside, you know, white writers, right?
Well, I think who gets to tell the history, who writes the history for many, many centuries have been white males. And I mean, the same issue for gay American literature and women's lit. You know, it was sort of like an afterthought. Oh, gee, there's more to it. And these groups don't want to necessarily be lumped in, and they do want to separate and make. So it's an odd dynamic because on the one hand, as a writer, you know, you are a Native American writer, you're an American writer, and I would venture to say that your readership is primarily not Native American. You know, most of us out here who are not, and that's what's getting you on, you know, these big platforms, and people are seeing you in a much broader way. Have your books been well received in the Native American among the citizens of the Penobscot in specific, and other people you run into?
I get beat up a lot. No, I get.
You look like you can handle it.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody hates the books, they've kept it to themselves. But for the large part, it's been nothing but an immense amount of love and support. And equally, I give that back to them, you know, and I'm trying to as best I can because they helped, you know, get me to the places I need to be, you know, through education and stuff. And, you know, they played a role in where I am today. So it's like, I feel happy in that regard, but I also feel really happy that they celebrate my work and, you know, that like Indigenous people want to like host me, like Wabanaki Public Health in Maine, for example, you know, did like my launch of the book in Maine. You know, everybody, I don't know, they've all been very proud. So I'm happy that has been the case. But when somebody does come up to me one day and is like, I don't like your book, I'll be like, yeah, well, okay.
Okay.
You know,
Thanks.
Nobody's fought me yet.
That's good. One of the things that you do beautifully is to these male relationships. I mean, you have this, you know, Charles obviously has this relationship he wants with his daughter, the relationship he has with his mother at the end of her life. But you really have these wonderful male relationships and these moments where, whether it's with his friend Bobby or his stepfather, where he's off alone with these guys, and you really they're very genuine feeling. And I'm wondering, were you tapping into your own relationships with guys? Was this something you purposefully set out to do to show this guy who's struggling, but who nonetheless has these very deep and I'd say in some cases complicated relationships with the other men in his life?
Yeah, I think part of it was maybe a little subconscious just because I feel like it's interesting with, with Night of the Living Rez, everybody was, well, not everybody, but a lot of people, had always been like, wow, you wrote the women so well in this book. Well, it's pretty easy when you think of them as human beings, yeah, but no one's ever actually asked the question about like the male characters, and like there is, I would describe it as like a gentle masculinity to them, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to this like, really like toxic form. I mean, of course, there are people in here at times that show that, but when we think about those soft, gentle moments between men, or boys, like when Charles and Jesus are young, right?
Right.
When Charles and Jesus are older, and we see those quiet, intimate, not intimate like in a sexual way, right? But like
Right.
in an intimate, really lovingly, like I love you, like this, like you are a person I love. Um,
Same with is it Bobby
with Bobby, yeah, yeah,
when
it's a
he's
little
an
harder to
adult?
see because Bobby's such a uh, ow, I pricked my finger. He's such a one of those type of people, but like it's still there. You see it, and I don't know. I kind of think, I mean, masculinity in of itself is a problem, right? Like patriarchy is a problem, but men can be gentle, like this is, I don't know. I think it was a subconsciously and then deliberate attempt at trying to showcase like it doesn't matter, but as long as you are kind and loving and have this approach, it's like you're a human being, since it's all defined by society, maybe this book can start a conversation in that way. Like you just brought it up, and you're the first person to have ever brought
Yeah.
that up. So
Well,
thank you.
it strikes me that, you have Charles, who sort of, this woman who he loved and, was hoping to be the father for the child and certainly her partner, you know, basically said, okay, I guess I have to step back. And he made choices. And Bobby, who has his own set of issues, is trying to plan a future life and is um, very concerned about Charles's mother and takes on this very warm role in her life as sort of a extension of their friendship, even though their friendship is somewhat a late in life friendship. he so you do have these men who have deep warmth and deep emotional awareness, but in many cases they don't have the right outlet or the right other person partner in their lives, and so these emotions transfer to these guys, which it was very nice because you read a lot of toxic males and you read a lot of you know male female relationships where there's a dominance, and in this case it was just these were just people interacting in a very human and realistic way, it seemed.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And you had me thinking there for a second. I was like, is Bobby what Charles would have been if like Charles's situation didn't exist, like with the child? Like, he's child free. He's still an alcoholic because of the reasons that, happen. His mom's dying. Like Bobby is now. I'm like thinking. I'm like, wait. I don't know. I'm reading it as like a literature person now, but
That's good.
no, it has me very interested. But
That's
yeah,
how I read it too.
the characters, yeah, they're all, I mean, they're all flawed. They're all flawed. Every single one of them. Elizabeth included. It's like, um, but for Charles, it's like I think he's the most difficult character for people to figure out, because he feels so empty, but he's really not. Like, it's the emptiness of him that is the actual stuff of him, and it's hard to see, but I don't know, when people read the book, it's like, and I just say this if you haven't read it, like, really, like, try to see what it is that he wants, right? And what he's missing, what he's doing wrong, and he's your guide through this book.
Yeah.
He really is, and it's like you get to a place, and if it hits you in some particular way, yet you can't find any redemption or any type of good qualities in that guide, Charles, it's like, how how then did we get here? So I feel he has redeeming qualities. I feel like he's this fully fulfilled character, but yeah,
Well,
Bobby is, yeah.
he's a sad character, and he's alone, and so you would think that in many ways readers would not necessarily identify with him or want to cheer him on and hope he gets to that redemptive place. He's sort of a challenging person. He's not like anybody I've met or anybody I have read about, in a book of fiction or nonfiction. And so, but he is definitely the heartbeat of the story, even though he's isolated, relatively speaking.
Yeah. I feel like he's the guy people will know a Charles like this, Charles, or if they don't, the next time you're driving down your road, just there's a person, if you're in a rural place or even in a city, like somebody you see all the time you've never talked to, like that's the Charles in your life. Like you haven't met them, but like for some reason, like that's how I envision it. Like it's like I know nothing about them, right? But if I were to talk to them, I would find out more, and they might actually be kind of like him.
That's true. All right, we are talking to Morgan Talty, the author of Fire Exit. And Morgan, can you also show us the cover of the UK version that just came out beginning of October, which has a very different kind of cover. Were you involved in the cover designs of these at all?
Yes. So this, And Other Stories is the name of the publisher, and I was told they were, and I believe them. They're a great place, a great house. But they're like the Tin House of the UK in a way.
Okay.
They used to do traditional covers for like artwork and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they only now do covers that are blank like this with just the opening of the story. They have the title, the author's name, and they will do the ampersand. That's like and other stories. But they've deviated it several times. So Tanya Tagaq, the writer, First Nations writer, her book had like the wolf figure on it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of doing the ampersand, we had these are what are referred to as double curves for Penobscot and Wabanaki. So they're symbols that we've used that have had like meanings applied to them. And so this one was created by Maya Atian. And she's a couple years younger than me. I was in school with her sister, so we grew up together. And this was her own original design. She took a double curve, and then there's like a flame. She had threw a flame in there. There were a couple others that were super cool, but we ended up going with this one. Yeah, so I think it's cool. I think it's kind of like, imagine if all books looked like this and there was like no real, like, you weren't getting caught by like a cover. It was like just the text. I don't know. It'd be cool.
It puts a little more pressure on that opening paragraph.
It does, yeah. And then in the back, I think, yeah, there's just blurbs, but then it is opens up like this.
Oh.
Okay. I don't know where the camera is, so it'll give you the synopsis. So it's like a hardback, but like, I don't know what the term is. So yeah.
Me neither. So I want to talk to you about a couple other things, and I want to remind our viewers that if you have questions for Morgan, we will be taking them shortly. One of the things you talk about, and that's sort of central to Bobby's character, as well then to a degree with Charles, is alcoholism and addiction, which as a non-Indigenous person, we hear a lot about those issues being prominent among Indigenous people. Do you, and I know I've read where you talked about it, that's just one aspect of a person's life. Did you feel it was important or significant to include that in this book? Did that make it more real from your perspective?
Real for the character, or for
the
like
character,
cultural...
for educating, for lack of a better word.
Okay, yeah.
Your broad readership, we come with some biases and some, socially, I don't know what the word is, socially told impressions. Like, I have an idea, like the same way the Google Images present an idea. The contemporary idea is that alcoholism is a big issue and is doing a lot of damage on to Indigenous people, young people in particular.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't set out to use it in any. I mean, with Night of the Living Res, it was prevalent because, I mean, that is was a reality and is a reality still for, a lot of Indigenous people. In my community, the book isn't speaking to Indian country all over the place. And and I know everybody's like, oh, it's a trope. It's a trope. It's been written about all these times, but it's like, you can't take, an actual issue that is still an issue and be like, it's a trope, you can't use it.
Right.
Because then you forget about it, and then you have then it becomes a larger issue. So it's like, one, not to put it in there would be an injustice, and I put it in there because it's like, actually, if you really think about it, there's more white people who are alcoholics in the book than there are than there are natives. So you all got to get it together. No, I'm just kidding. But it is everybody has in their family people with substance abuse issues. And if you don't, that is beautiful and a wonderful thing. But I feel like the majority of people have people who are addicted to alcohol or to just very severe, heavy, drugs. So,
it's just the reality. And it's not, and in terms of like the stories that we will think about Charles and the other characters, Bobby, that's only one aspect of their life. And you talked about that in some interviews. Like, it's just one thing. Yeah. It's not the only thing.
Yeah, that's not the thing that defines them. It's the thing that actually brings them together. The bar where they're sitting and talking most nights, even though Charles is sober by that point and Bobby is still just not,
No.
Like, so it's interesting. We have a non-alcoholic and an alcoholic sitting in a bar talking.
And taking care of each other in different ways.
Taking care of each other, yeah.
So, all right, I know we have some questions, so can we put them up? This is from Jenna Blum, our Blaze co-founder. Who are Morgan's comfort food writers? Who are the writers who make him want to write? And maybe that's two different groups of people. And I know you had a book you wanted to recommend as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, first I got to give a shout out to this book right here, which everybody needs to buy. It's available now. It's called Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts by Nick Reese Gardner. It is published by Madrona
You can
Books.
See it?
Yeah, Madrona Books, and it is a phenomenal interconnected story collection by an author who has not just the talent, but the experience to tell the stories in this. Think of Jesus's son, but there's actual sun in it. There's actual light by the end. So yeah, but you need to, if you don't buy this, I'm never going to be your friend. Yeah. So, but other writers, I go back to Anton Chekhov the most, I think. Gusev, for example. Any and all of his work really is stuff that I return to. Short pieces by Carver. The Cathedral by Carver, I think, is, like a really great one. It's interesting because is there a specific one that I have read? Oh, The Lesser Blessed by Richard Van Camp it's like a novella.
Okay.
That's one I go to like religiously every year. But yeah, that I would say is my religiously like one like text I would say is my comfort, like go to. This gets me in gear to go.
Okay.
I'm too busy reading, like stuff that's coming out, and yeah, it gets hard. But
you do a lot of promoting of books on your Twitter account. You're very active in social media, and one of the things that you do that I so admire, and you give me my next reads, is you promote books that you're reading and that you're excited about. Okay, Kim Rudder asks, what is the significance of the title? And says the cover really draws me to it. So what does Fire Exit mean to you?
I just asked Chat GPT what I should call my book. No, I didn't know what to title the book. It was almost going to be called, because there's a line in the book near the end where like the stakes are at the highest, and Charles says something along the lines of, "That has been my life, a pursuit of only remains." But that sounded like way too much like
Remains of the Day.
Like that type of like Nobel Prize. Like, I don't know. It was like too fancy, and I was like, this book, it can't be like, no. So I was like, well, what do I call it? And I kept thinking about the fire exit signs and that Charles sees when he brings his mom to doctor's appointments. And I just got to thinking, and I was like, fire. And originally there was a comma in there, and it said fire, comma, exit. And for me, it's become this like, now I recognize it. I'm like, oh, there's a fire. We all should probably get out of here. Like, I feel like this book is saying something about identity that hasn't, and maybe I didn't do it as well enough, but like writing about identity is so hard because identity is a thing, like it's an idea, like we can see it at times, but other times we can't, right? Like you wouldn't know that I'm indigenous by like, being out and about. If I showed you my ID card, my tribal ID card, yeah, you believe me. But identity like is hard enough. Like what collective object could really encompass all of it? And I was like, blood quantum. I was like, that's a literal thing. It's on paper. It's like names of people. It's written into law. It's like it exists. And so I saw it as my way of being like, all right, I can talk about this, but I'm going to try not to, because I want to be a writer and write about characters and stuff, but nurture it in a way where there is a fire and we need to get out of the building, like, and the building is called colonialism, so, and let it just burn down, but it'll just like build itself back up like Walmart in the South Park episode when they keep trying to get rid of it.
Okay. Have the Penobscot considered expanding their enrollment as a result of this book? Or do you think they will?
If they have, no, I doubt they have. I doubt they have, but there have been a number of conversations I've had. There's some podcasts folks should check out. They're with Donna Loring. I think you guys can probably share the links to them after, but there's 4 total that are really good. And they're not about just the book, but about blood quantum and like law in Maine and federal Indian law. And we have a colleague of mine, Professor Darren Ranko from the UMaine joins us, and other guest speakers come in. And Donna Loring was the hand of the governor during the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act. So that's a great, we've been talking a lot about like the possibilities of like what we actually can do that I don't think many Indigenous people know, at least in our community, that we actually can do. Because they hear they're increasing enrollment. Oh, that means we're going to lose this, and it's like, no, we can structure it however we want.
What made you want to be an author, and who influenced you the most?
Don't laugh, but the person who influenced me the most was Jack Kerouac. Yeah, because
Not a bad one.
Not a bad one. His voice is so beautiful, but I can't. I mean, I've read everything that he's written. I mean, everything from like archival stuff, like just all of it. Like, but I tried to reread On the Road like 2 years ago, and I was like, this voice is beautiful, but like I can't listen to this song anymore, if that makes sense, you know. But I was always traveling on the Greyhound bus at least twice a year at least to see my dad in Connecticut. So I'd go from Maine to Bridgeport, and it was a pretty long haul. And I don't know, when I encountered Kerouac when I was 18, I was like, I didn't know what I wanted to do, except I was like, oh, I'll be a writer. I had no idea what that entailed. And if I did, I probably still would have done it because I'm stubborn and stupid. But like, I was a storyteller. I'd always been a storyteller. But Kerouac was the one who I think influenced me the most. But then I chose to be a writer because it got to the point where I had no other skills.
That's not true.
I was too deep in to come out. You know what I mean? Like I was too far gone. So I had no choice eventually, you know. But I did love storytelling, and I loved writing, and I love writing. I love it and hate it. But it's the only thing I can see myself doing besides teaching or talking about it.
Let me just ask, what are you working on now?
Oh God, how much time do you have?
I mean, personally as well as professionally.
Yeah. So I do have a third book that's under contract that will be out in, I think, 2026 or 2027, and it is a memoir and essays, or we could just simply say a memoir or an essay collection. But if you say essay collection, nobody buys it. If you say memoir, everybody goes after it. So we'll figure it out. But
I'll definitely go after it either way.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you. We have one pre-order already then. So I'm working on that, and it's really starts with the birth of my son and will end eventually at some point when I've lived it. You know, I've been writing a lot of these pieces, essays, narratives, you know, and I've published a lot of them, not a lot of them, but published nonfiction in this way on different places, and memoirs specifically. But I'm trying to bring my mom and dad, who are both gone and have never met my son, kind of back to life and tell their stories when the opportunity arrives. And I think it's about raising a child, you know, it's about marriage. But at the end of the day, my real purpose of this book is so that my children, you know, I have Charlie now and hopefully more one day, is that my children can pick up the book and read it and be like, I feel like I knew them all my life, you know? So like, that's my real purpose of the book. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there, while also, I guess, making it sell. But even if I'd abandon the whole saleability of it just to do that. So
that's great. It's a wonderful conversation we've been having. I very much appreciate your time. Fire Exit is a great read, whether you get to it in Native American Heritage Month or some other time. These are characters that are just memorable, and I am so glad I fought hard to get you on the show, because it's been a great conversation. Just to give you a heads up, we are Mighty Blaze. You can find all sorts of details about our shows, past and present, on mightyblaze.com. Tonight, if you want more books and book recommendations, we have a show at 8 p.m. Eastern, and you can go onto YouTube or Facebook and find us there. It's always a lot of fun, and you can hear about what we're reading and what's new and coming out. And I will be back on December 5th with Banning Lion, who has written a haunting and hopeful memoir called The Chair in the Valley. Just blew me away, as did Fire Exit. So hope to see you then. Till then, keep reading. And thanks again, Morgan.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, everybody.